everybody. This is Jeff Morton, your host of Let's Talk About It. I want to thank you all for joining me, and those of you who are going to check this out, the recorded version. This is going to be on YouTube, it'll be on Rumble, and it'll also be on Facebook. Of course, it'll be on my website, which is called freefromfear.us. Thanks for checking in today. Okay. Now, listen, tonight's show is going to be a little special. It's very special to me because we're going to talk about a place called George Junior Republic, which this particular one that I'm going to talk about tonight is in Freeville, New York. It's not too far from Ithaca, New York. And I'm going to have a couple of guests on here tonight that also went to George Junior Republic. Karen Green's going to be joining us later on here in just a bit. And also Tom Kinney. Both are from George Junior Republic. We spent some time there. We all were there at different times, although Tom and I, we crossed paths. He came about a month before I left. So we're going to talk about George Junior Republic, and I need to give you a little background about what that is. I got to read it over here because my printer's still dead. I got a new one coming. George Junior Republic was started by a guy named William Reuben George, founded the Republic. It was in civic and social conditions reproduced like the United States of America. In other words, we had our own government. We had our banking system. The kids kind of ran the whole thing. We had supervision from adults, whatnot. But we went to school half a day. Some of us went to school all day long, or you could learn a trade. I went to high school for 4 hours a day, and then I was involved in the print shop and also horticulture. Not horticulture. The equestrian stuff, because I worked with the horses. Like my favorite horse, Cloud, died in my lap. Anyway, he started the school. I'm just going to read what it says. In the summer of 1890, he took 22 children to Freeville with funds received from the New York Tribune, the sponsors of the Fresh Air Fund charity. Each summer from then until 1895, the number of children increased. What he was doing was taking kids who were inner city kids, the gangs of New York, and he was taking them out of the city life and then putting them in the farmlands where they could get away from a lot of the trouble that they were in. And then he taught them about the Republic. It was really a cool experience. I ended up at George Junior Republic in 1972, the end of 1972. The courts sent me to George Junior Republic. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But really, I kind of want you to hear the story from my guests. We had two other people that were going to join us tonight, but one individual is dealing with a pretty difficult situation and she had to cancel. And then the other person, her name was Barbara, she canceled. She said she just got a lot going on. But the other thing too, folks, is this is broadcast in the Pacific Northwest, and my whole world back in those days was on the East Coast. Okay. So we got a lot to go over, a lot to talk about. And really, I just want you guys to hear the experiences we all had from ourselves individually. I'll share a little bit later on. But first and foremost, let me bring in my guests. I want you to meet Karen Green and Tom Kinney. Hi, you guys.
Hey.
Howdy.
Hey. So now we're going to start with you, Karen, and go ahead and leave everybody on the screen if you would, Carol. Carol's my engineer. He's in the background. You can't see him. He kind of does everything that makes this show work. So, Karen, we're going to start the show off with you.
Okay.
I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. Talk about how you ended up at George Junior Republic, even if you have to get in the dirt, because there might be some young people that see this.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll talk towards the end of the show, we'll talk about how that experience affected us and how our lives, how we benefited or maybe not. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to hear both of your stories for the first time tonight. Heard a little bit about yours, Karen, when we talked on the phone. Tom, I know very little about you. So you'll get your opportunity to share your hard luck story, how you ended up at GJR. Folks, just for the record, GJR was a bunch of screwed up kids that were up in the mountains learning how to get along with each other. So Karen, you got the show. Give us 5 minutes.
So I actually had a lot of family issues. There was a lot of physical, domestic violence that I was experiencing very young between my parents, and as well as alcoholism, drug use, and things like that. Coming up, I got to see, unfortunately, a lot of things that little children shouldn't really be seeing. With that being said, I started to, when I entered school, I started to not do very well in school, and I became very a truant. I guess that what they called it. I had a truant officer that would often come try to find me to bring me to school and things like that. I wound up in a group home. This is in 1983. I wound up in a group home, and when you're young, you think you know it all, and you have all the answers, and you just want to be out there on your own, so to speak. So I wound up on probation, and when I was 13, and I had a probation officer who he was a really great guy. His name was Woody Anderson, and I was just really out there in the streets. I was drinking, I was smoking weed, I was smoking cigarettes, I was being very promiscuous. And it was really to the point where I had to make a decision of what I was going to do with my life. And I chose to leave Rockland County. I'm from Nyack, New York. Very proud of that. And January 9th, 1984, I was put on a airplane, and sent up to Ithaca to go to the George Junior Republic, which everyone has their own experiences that they share from George Junior Republic. And, as we talk more during this segment, I can say that it really truly saved my life, took me out of a very bad home life situation, and opened my eyes up to things that I had never seen before or experienced. You say get in the dirt, I could say there's times we didn't have food. There's times that, we didn't have a phone. The lights were shut off. We weren't sure where we were going to go or where we were going to live. And a lot of different things happened while I was at George Junior Republic, with my family dynamic. And I was just grateful that to have a roof over my head, a bed to sleep in, and 3 meals a day and snack. So, that's just a little bit of it. I mean, I don't want to blame it all on my family. I've come to terms with a lot as an adult, how some of the choices I made as a child, yes, they came from unfortunate experiences that I was dealing with at a young age, but I also chose, to be in the streets and do the things that I was doing also. So,
Okay, so now when you say you ended up at George Junior Republic, how did that happen? Were you standing before juvenile judges? I mean,
right.
tell me how you ended up in George Junior Republic as opposed to a lockup for girls.
Okay, so I did have a choice of where I wanted to go, because I did make the call to my probation officer, and I said, I want to leave Nyack. I need to get out of here. Um, someone very close and dear to me at the time said to me, Karen, you got to get out of here. Like, you're just going down a very dark path, and it's only going to get worse. So I called him and I said, I want to get away from here. And he gave me an option to go to St. Anne's in Albany, Vander Hayden Hall, which was also somewhere up by Albany, or to go to George Junior Republic. So they took me to an office down in Manhattan. And once I saw pictures of horses, I said, that's where I want to go. So I wound up in another group home for 3 months before I left for George Junior on January 9th of 84. But yes, I did have to go in front of the judge. I did have to, he did sentence me, so to speak, to what I thought was a year, but later found out was 18 months, which turned into 3.5 years. So yeah, it was the court system. I was on a PINS petition, which is person in need of supervision, which is something that the court system puts a youth on when they are unruly, juvenile delinquents, so to speak. So that's kind of how I was already in the court system, and how I wound up going to George Junior.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I did. I had an older sister I had an older brother and I had a younger brother. My younger brother was also in placement, but he stayed in Rockland County. He was in a part of St. Agatha's group home, or St. Dominic's, one of them. Yeah. So he stayed in placement, but local. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
so Carol, do you have the picture of the first day that she?
oh,
There you go. Now, see when I see that picture of you, I mean, we're back in the 80s. You look absolutely terrified. This was your
I
first day. Tell me
was.
about that.
Well, that was my first day, and it was January in upstate New York. Now, yes, I'm from closer to the
That's
city,
cold.
20
Yes.
miles from, Manhattan. So this was way up in the middle of nowhere. I mean, I was like, where am I? So that was the first day. And we got a big sister, a big brother, a big sister to help us like walk around and take a tour of the campus and let us know where we were, like, what was going on. But that was my first day. And that I was 13 years old and I was pretty much petrified because I was out of my norm. I was out of what I was comfortable with. And now I'm put in a house with 12 other girls who I don't know, with house parents I don't know. It was a scary experience. It was very, very scary at first. To be put together with a bunch of people. Yes, I was in the group homes in Rockland County, but I was also home. I was still in, close to Nyack, but
Right.
being way upstate and in the middle of January and there's tons of snow and it was freezing. Yeah. Needless to say, I was petrified.
So I'm just going to recap what you said. You were getting in a lot of trouble. You were very promiscuous. You said you were only 13 years old. I
Yeah.
mean, that had to be a scary time as well for
Yeah.
a 13-year-old girl in New York. What people
Yeah.
out here in the West Coast don't understand is we learned how to survive back in
Mm-hmm.
the day. New Yorkers are different than the East Coast folks. They're just different, or West Coast folks.
Yeah.
But where you live now? You live down in North Carolina?
Yes, I actually came to North Carolina in 2004 with Verizon. I worked for Verizon for 19 years. I took an early retirement in 2019, so I don't currently work for them, but they relocated parts of the business down to Wilmington, North Carolina in August of 04. So I'm just about at 20 years being in the South. Definitely better weather.
Okay,
So
so now before we switch over to Tom, how long were you at George Junior Republic?
I was there till June of 1987. And that was actually my 16th birthday. That was April 3rd, 1986. They bought me a
No,
cake. And
that's a
that
different
shirt,
smile.
right? But that shirt says nothing without labor. And that was the motto of
Right.
George Junior
That was
Republic.
our
And that
motto.
was one of
Right.
their shirts.
Nothing without labor. I saw somebody posted that in our group. We have a group
Yeah.
page on Facebook from a lot of the alumni from George Junior Republic. And when I saw that, I went, wow, nothing
Yeah.
without labor. That was a flashback. It took me
Yeah.
back. So, yeah,
So
I
I
do
wound up
remember that.
leaving. I graduated high school. Oh, that was my horse. And
Yes.
I worked in the stables because like Jeff said, we had jobs half the day and we worked half the day and we got 40 to 60 cents an hour for working and going to school. But I graduated high school. A lot of other things happened during that time, and maybe later in the segment I'll talk about that. But
We will talk
um,
about that.
yeah, I wound up graduating high school in June of 1987, a year earlier than my home grade, my school back in Nyack. So, yeah, and then I left in June of 87. So 3.5 years I was there.
Okay. So we're going to get back into some of the things that happened to Karen's life after she left, as well as the impact of George Junior Republic. But right now, we're going to talk to Tom. All right, Tom, you're up. Give me 5 minutes.
Well,
We're
I'm not
talking
sure.
about how you ended up there and when you got there. Go ahead.
Well, like Karen said, and I think a lot of people that wound up there come from the same type of background, broken home. There was alcoholism. There was domestic issues. And plus, I never really had, we moved around a lot. So I was always trying to find my way. I was always trying to be part of the crowd. I never really had a circle of friends because once you got to meet people, we had to move away. But got into a lot of trouble. I guess that was my way of dealing with everything, was lashing out. And yes, I was on probation. I had a probation officer, and I wasn't given any pamphlets or shown any pictures like Karen mentioned about horses and all. I was told I'll be going for a period not to exceed 18 months because I was an incorrigible youth and his mother can't handle him. I have 3 older brothers, but they were all out of the house. So I was just there with my little sister. So I was kind of just creating havoc for them. So it was decided that's where I should go. And of course, I didn't believe them when they said, yeah, we'll be here on such and such a date. Well, it was September of 76. I don't know the exact day, and so I went out partying the night before, my friends, everything, we're going to miss you. And I didn't believe it until the next morning when my mother come in and said, they're here. I said, who's here? They're here. It's time to go. And so I was all hungover on my 3-hour trip up to Downsville, New York.
How old were you?
So I wasn't in the best of mood when I got there. It's hard to tell on that picture, but so yeah. And then the first picture with that's the second picture. I was his big brother. I'm the guy in the sweater, but I don't remember the other guy's name. But the first picture is me and Frank Petrie was his name. And I was a little 4'6" kid that that coat to me. I could swim inside that coat there. And you can see the long hair. So that was before that cut. That, like I said, that was my first outburst, was getting that haircut. If the hair touched the collar, you need a haircut. If halfway down the ear, you need a haircut. If it was halfway down your forehead, you need a haircut. And if it stood up longer than 2 inches on top, you need a haircut. So they just chopped it all off, and I just burst out of there. Anybody come near me, I was swinging, but and trying to fit in. You're doing things, substances and alcoholism, and I got into that at an early age. I was only, I was 15 when I went there, and I turned 16 there, and I got out just before my 17th birthday. So. I don't know if I recognize what benefits it gave me until years later.
We're going to talk about that. We'll talk about that because we're going to have another segment on it. So hold on to that thought. Now, let me ask you a couple of questions. Did you have a dad in the home?
No.
Okay, so it was you. The older brothers were gone.
I mean, there was in the beginning. There was, but then there was a lot of alcoholism and domestic abuse. And so then my parents got divorced. So there was just me and my sister, one of my brothers, and my mother.
What kind of trouble?
My mother went into the program to kick her alcoholic problem. And she eventually became a counselor where she would go speak at men's prisons. And she would speak to people who had a blackout and ran over 2 people and killed them and didn't know that. So that was what she dealt with. And she was always telling me, you know what you got to do, because, life was sucking. I had nothing going on, nothing going on except partying and, trying to fit in. And my way of fitting in was partying the most.
What kind of trouble did you get into? When you say, you had to go before a judge, what kind of trouble were you getting into that would cause you to breaking
into houses and stores and just like vandalism, just. They had a thing called gate night. That's the night before Halloween. So you go out and you trash things. Well, you get caught for doing that. That's, destroying somebody's property. That's vandalism. My brothers came to get me out of jail before my mother would, because they wouldn't tell her. They didn't want her to get upset. So I would call my brothers to come get me, and they would come get me. And of course I get smacked around by the big brothers for getting and doing the stupid stuff. And then, the judge, like I said, he said, exactly, for a period not to exceed 18 months. And I'll tell you how I left there. Whenever you want to know that, I'll tell you. But I was there. I was 17 months and 3 weeks. And there was a social doctor there. His name was Mr. Deneen.
Oh, yeah.
So I go to see him on 17-month and 3-week mark. And he said, well, the courts are kind of backed up and, we might not be able to get there for 3, maybe even 6 more months. I stood up and I stuck out my hand and I said, it's nice to have known you. I won't be here in the morning. And I split that night. Me and another guy split that night. A guy from Spring Valley. Karen would know about Spring Valley, and we hitchhiked. We had to hide from everybody because you didn't know if it was security, because security would come find you. I knew people from Georgia, from Indiana. They go get you and they bring you back. So we had to hide from all the cars at night, and it was the wintertime. So we got our dress shoes on because that's all we had was dress shoes. So we're diving over the snowbanks and we're hitchhiking and hiding from what might be security coming to get you. And it took 350 miles. It took like 6 rides and we made it back to Rockland County. Now, I didn't go home because I knew they would be there, or if they weren't there, they were on their way there. So I called the house and my mother said, they're here waiting for you. And I said, I know, that's why I'm not there. So being it was wintertime, they said, stay home. Let's just say it was a Friday. They said, stay home, go to court on Monday. I stayed home. I stayed there. Monday was a snowstorm. People from up there couldn't get down to Rockland County. And they said, come back to court on Wednesday. So when I went to court on Wednesday, they tried to say we could use the additional time to prepare Tom for the ever-growing world. And my probation officer kind of snickered at that. And then he rambled off my positive traits, or whatever you want to call that, from being there. I worked the extra job in Ewald, breakfast and dinner. I was a foreman in the art shop. I worked lawn maintenance. I went to school. I don't know. Karen said you went half a day. I don't know if that was mandatory, but when I was there, it was voluntary. You got paid 50 cents a class to go to classes.
Really?
And so I went to.
I think maybe that was the case with me too, but go ahead.
So I went to class for 4 hours in the morning, and then did the afternoon shift. Either it was lawn maintenance or the art shop with Mrs. Harris, who was one of the best people there.
Mrs. Harris, yes, absolutely.
Yes. Mrs. Harris was one of the best people there.
Yep,
she was, without a doubt. Well, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my story. I'm from Rochester, New York, you guys. And what happened with me was my mom had 7 kids and we didn't have a dad in the house. It was terrible. We were poor. I mean, I remember when we only had 1 fork in our whole family, so we would share the fork. I remember, Karen, you'll get this, when we had 6 feet of snow outside and they came to turn the gas and electric off. And we would have to get up and go to school the next day. My mom used to have the stove. Well, they didn't turn the gas off because it wasn't both at the time. You had gas and you had electricity. They always turned the electricity off. So you could always tell what kid in the neighborhood's family didn't pay the bill because the lights would be out at nighttime with a blizzard outside. Okay. And so that's the way it was for us. And then mom didn't have a lot of money. She didn't have anything really to take care of stuff. I remember we would eat cream of mushroom soup on toast for a week. If we ate anything, she always fed the youngest ones first. So it was a tough time. Well, what I was doing out in the streets, I'm like 12 years old. I'm boosting cars. I'm stealing cars and taking them to the chop shop. That's right. I'm going to these nursing homes because the people always put the keys in the visor. And I would just take the key out of the visor, drive the car over back into the ghetto to the booster shop. They would give me a little bit of money. I'd go buy some dope and sell it at the high school. Some pot. That's basically what I was doing. But I was also breaking into businesses and doing all kinds of crazy stuff that you don't think about. Finally, the thing that broke the straw, I had a teacher named Victor Hall, and he had this blue Monte Carlo. I love that car. And I'd skip at school and all that kind of stuff too. But I took his key and I made a mold of it. Oh my God. I made a mold of his key and then poured that lead into it. And so when he'd be in the school teaching, I was out driving his car around with all my friends. And one day one day I came home after putting his car back, and I came home and he was standing on the porch with a couple police officers. So they put me in JDH, juvenile detention hall. And while I was in juvenile detention hall, there was another kid in there. The first time I'd ever heard of any kid shooting a teacher. Well, this kid named Rodney Gayton, he shot a teacher, and he was in the juvenile hall. While we were in there, he and I became friends. We kind of like cousins in a way, because I knew him before he went in, before he shot the teacher. And we grew up in the ghetto. I mean, it was ghetto. It was ghetto. We caught him. We went into the bathroom. This is important. We went into the bathroom, and there was a kid in the bathroom stall, a little scrawny white kid getting molested by an older kid, an older black kid. So we jumped on that kid and stopped what he was doing. And we got kind of patted on the back, if you will. We got recognized for stopping what he was doing. We damn near beat that boy half to death, to be honest with you, because he was messing with one of the little kids. And I was only in there for 30 days, okay? I was only in there for 30 days. And I remember when the judge, my mother took me, my probation officer's name was Don Simpkin. I'm standing in front of this judge before I got sent to JDH. That's why he sent me to JDH, because of what I'm about to tell you. He said, young man, when the street lights come on, you better have yourself in the house. I don't ever want to see you in my courtroom again. And then he goes, do you have anything to say for yourself, young man? You got to understand, I'm 12, 13 years old. I looked up at this judge and I said, F you, I'm out of here. And I turned around and tried to run out the door. Well, I didn't get very far. I'll never forget when I turned around trying to run out the door. My mother sitting there with the probation officer. She put her head down like this, like, oh, Lord. And and the judge said 30 days, JDH. So when we saved that kid from being molested in there, that was the first time in my life I made a difference. And it was like, wow. And so when I went back to stand before the judge, he said, well, you're going to be in the house when the street lights come on? And I said, I don't really want to go home. Do I have to leave? Do you have to leave the JDH? So Don Simpkin told them that I was pretty smart and that maybe we should try to do something else. And I'll never forget when we were driving, and I wrote about this in my book, a whole chapter on GJR. When we were driving from Rochester to Ithaca, and it's like a 2.5-hour drive, can't remember. I kept sitting there thinking how much I appreciated him, because in my mind, I was about to go on a journey. I was leaving home. I wasn't going to be sitting in the house in the dark watching my mama cry because she couldn't feed us. I wasn't going to be out in the streets running. I felt like somebody was protecting me that mom couldn't. And my mother was a saint, don't misunderstand me. But 7 kids was hard. And I'll never forget when I rolled up on George Junior Republic. It was in the fall. The leaves were turning orange and green and gold. You know how it is upstate. And I thought, man, this place is beautiful. It's beautiful. And I didn't know what was going to happen, but I think I was just turning 13, but I'm in the custody of the state, and they're taking me to some place, and it was like a journey to me. It was like, whoa. And as we toured the campus and all that stuff, and I got the big brother, and we went rolling around the campus, and I was like, okay. And I had an afro. I had a Michael Jackson thing going on back in the day. And I remember when they put me down in that chair, Tom, cut all my hair off. I could pull my afro down to my chin. They cut all my hair off. I was like, whoa. Anyway, my story in the beginning, I got bumped into, I met some, he was one of the stockholders. His last name was Choate. That's what I remember. His family's name was on the Choate house that they put me in. He was a jerk, and he was a board member. So he was there visiting, and he started saying all these nasty things to me. And I'm 13 years old. I attacked him, I attacked him, hit him with a couple things. He was a man. And next thing I know, it was a Seidel. So they took me out of the campus and put me in the nut hut, which was where all the kids who had all the problems went. I've called it the nut hut for 50 years. Anyway, I was in Seidel for I don't know how long, probably close to a year. And then I finally got out of Seidel, and that's when they put me back in Choate. And, from that moment on, everything began to change. And the thing I remember the most about being there is I was meeting kids and being involved with kids who had bigger problems than I had, who'd come from homes that were far worse than mine was. And I began to feel like, wow, I'm not the only one going through this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the only person feeling this way. I'm not alone. And some of the stories that the other kids told me were, your jaw would drop. And so I realized that at some point we were just kids trying to survive broken homes. And I began to take advantage of my time at George Junior Republic. But it sounds like, Tom, with you, tell me about your experience at George Junior. You couldn't wait to leave. Is that what I'm hearing? I mean, what happened that?
I think everybody looked forward to getting out of there. And once you grew up a little bit and realized things weren't so bad, like I said, I worked the lawn maintenance, so I learned how to work on those the International, it was called, the big International with the wing on each side and the one in the back. So you're cutting, 8 feet at a time, 6 feet at a time. And then the art shop, I really enjoyed the art shop. I didn't know anything when I got there. And there was a guy in Newberger. His name was Joe Hoplock, and another guy named Mark Myers.
They were
the best on the potter's wheel. And that's what they showed. They taught me that. So eventually I was teaching people, and I became the foreman in the art shop. And eventually we had stuff on display at the Robertson Center for the Arts and Sciences in Rochester. And you got a little gold key. That was a big deal in pottery land. So, and Mrs. Harris, she was just the best. We took advantage of her good heart. She'd be, if you remember the art shop, there was this side and then there was that side. The side with all the windows and the other side where the doors we came in. Well, she'd be on one side working. We're on the other side sneaking a cigarette.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now she could smell it, and she'd come around the corner. And of course, we just played the game, and she knew. It wasn't hard to figure out who it was doing that. And of course, some of the other kids were stealing the solvents and huffing them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I didn't do any of that stuff.
And one guy was found on the ground at the base of the truck's gas tank, down by the
Heavy equipment
where the horses were and the maintenance.
Yeah.
Wild Bill Sager, we called him, this big guy, Bill Sager. He's the one, he had to wear them flight suits in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
These big, heavy duty flight suits, going out shoveling snow. And if you got into the jail crew, you had to earn your privileges. They called them privs. And the best you could get was 4, 4, and 4.
Yep.
Now, again, you two know what that means. But to explain that to somebody else, what that means is you get 4 hours of soft furniture, 4 cigarettes.
Oh, my God, I'm getting flashbacks.
And 4 hours of television. And if you didn't work, Pop Towner was the guy in charge of the jail crew.
Pop Towner, yep.
Now, if you could ask Pop Towner, why is the grass green? And he'd stand there and you could have a conversation for the next 2 hours. But then come priv time, you don't get no privs. Now, you thought he was being your buddy, but he was just telling a story. You could work and still listen to the story. And you get no privs, so you had to sit at the hard table. And if you were in a jail crew, you had to sit at the hard table. You had to have a tie on at all times, and you ate separately. Mm-hmm. So,
yep.
And another guy, Mike Skolarski, he was in Choate, I believe. He was the judge. He was the judge that you had to go before. And then he would ask, what did you have suspended or whatever that meant? And the little clerk of courts would pull out a little card and say, it would show what was told would happen if you did it again. And so that's what he would, he would pass judgment, like, who the hell are you?
A chit. It was a write-up. They called it a chit. And then you had to go see the magistrate, and then he sent you to jail. Then you had to be a part of the jail crew. It was just like a regular little republic, a little community. So yes, I went through all of that stuff. I'll tell that story a little later on. But
the
anyway,
house
I
parents,
knew Mike Skolarski. I remember Mike Skolarski.
The house parents, well, I had Mom and Pop Ashley. I don't know any other house parents there other than by name and seeing them at meals. But we were, when I first got there, I wasn't there long enough to take advantage of the first trip home. After, if you were good, you got to go home for a vacation.
Yeah. Spring.
Well, I wasn't there long enough to earn that. And Pop Ashley, for everybody, I think most of the people smoke cigarettes there. And in the wintertime, during that break, when not everybody was there, after meals, Sunday, the meal was in the house. And he'd say, all right, gentlemen, smoke them if you got them. Yeah. And we'd sit around that big, giant fireplace in the center of the room, smoking cigarettes like there was no tomorrow. Of course, I don't smoke anymore. I just passed 4 years of not having a cigarette, but I smoked for, 47 years. That's why I look chubby.
Well, I'm going to jump in.
There was fun times, I think Karen mentioned, and you mentioned you have 3 meals a day and you have things that are provided to you that I didn't have. Having 3 older brothers, I was lucky if the shoes only had 2 holes in the bottom when I got them.
Right. Been there, done that.
The hand-me-downs. My mother would put plastic bags on your feet and cardboard inside the shoe so your foot wouldn't get wet.
Going to school.
Yeah, we were poor. Poor was a nice way to put it.
Right.
But having been up there, the experiences, you create friendships. And I've looked for people with the invention of social media. I have found some, they say hello, but a lot of people are just not into corresponding. A lot of people want to leave the past in the past. I get a kick out of telling this story to people who get it, people who understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I talk about the snowdrift.
We're gonna jump in here with Karen. Hang on to the snowdrift story, Karen. I want to get back to you because what happened in Georgia during the Republic for you being female? Tell your story and some of the things that happened to you while you were there.
I mean, there was so much transition while I was there. I mean, the beginning, I wound up in Stralem too, and Jeff mentioned Seidel. Seidel and Stralem were special houses that were more close-knit, so to speak. It's hard to explain to people that don't really understand it, but I say it's like a big college campus in upstate New York. There was houses that we call cottages. There was a dining center. There was a gym. There was
swimming pool. Remember the swimming pool?
There wasn't any bars and there wasn't any fences. You were on your honor to be there.
It was not secure. We had jobs. I did horticulture. I did the stables. I did the mail run from Van Cleef. I did, so many different things. I was house laundress. I was house cook. I worked in Ewald. I did so many jobs. But I mean, there's one thing I can say, and I know Tom mentioned, getting in touch with people. I developed friendships there that I still have to this day that we may not talk every day, but social media has definitely brought a lot of us together. Those that were there in the early to mid 80s, that I still have relationships. I hung out with a bunch of people down in Manhattan 5 years ago. We all met up for dinner and we have a relationship and a bond that it's hard to explain to other people that have never been there. Because when I say, oh my gosh, I scraped the wax off of the Ewald floor stairwell because I was in jail because I ran away. And, where was I going in April when it was still snowing? I made it from McAllister House to the school and I got arrested, and had to go in front of the magistrate. But, it taught me a lot of things. I
Ask
did
me
the
about cleaning the bricks later.
right. I mean, there's so many things I could say. I learned so much there, and it was hard because I always wanted to be home. Always wanted to go back to Nyack. I always wanted that family. My mother, she was an alcoholic for many years. I didn't have anywhere to go home to because she had nowhere to provide for me to go. Fortunately, I have a friend who I still am friends with 54 years that her mother opened her home to me, and that's where I would go on home visits. And I still stay there when I go to New York. But I learned a lot about responsibility. I learned about accountability. I learned about choices we make and decisions we make in life and the consequences that you have. You know, I I did very dumb things even while I was there. I don't want to say that, my whole time there I was a saint. I broke
Right.
curfew. I smoked illegal use of tobacco, or IUT as we used to call
Yep.
it.
Yeah,
Uh,
the VHC.
I would be, breaking curfew at night because I wanted to run around, at night, running through the cornfields. Like,
I,
it's hysterical, when you
I
think of these things.
I didn't run through the cornfields. I rendezvoused in the cornfields.
Well, yeah,
That's
I mean,
right.
I got
We
in
used
all
to
kind of trouble.
rendezvous in the orchard, in the apple orchards,
apple,
or
yeah.
Oh
just go
boy.
right up to the window to get a couple of kisses.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
the
I
McAllister,
got
because it
more
was
than
all
kisses, bro.
windows. Yeah.
It was a
But
mess. So anyway, you're there. How long were you there?
3.5 years. So
And
there's
then
a couple little things that happened during that time. So um unfortunately my father passed away of an overdose in July 31st, 1986. So he it was very sad, but he did pass away while I was there. And during that time I actually became very involved in a church in the local area and was allowed to go off campus and go to church. So I met a family that became my foster parents, Jim and Nancy Crawford. They lived in Freeville, and I moved out of George Jr. and I went to live with them in Freeville, and I went to the local high school, Dryden High School, and this was in August of '86. And during that time, it was a very big culture shock to me. I was telling Jeff how I come from Nyack, Rockland County. Certain areas, but it's very diverse. When I went to Dryden High School, there was about maybe two Black
wait. Hang on a
kids in
second.
there.
Let me translate what she just said to y'all. I grew up around a whole lot of Black folks, and then
Yeah,
all of a sudden, I'm hooked up in this high school with only two Black people. So
out
for
of
her, we
yeah.
tell it like it was. Come on, tell it.
It
Tell it the
was
way it was.
literally yes. I mean, yep. Where I lived in Nyack, it was
It was
predominantly
a
Black,
hood.
and that was
Yes.
what I was around and comfortable with, and still. But when I went to Dryden High School, there was two Black kids there from grade 7 through 12. It was a very big culture shock for me. So some things happened, and I wound up leaving the foster parents' house and going back to George Jr. And at that point, I buckled down. I decided to, really get my head wrapped around school, and I focused really just on getting done with high school, which I did. But you know, if you ask some of the people that were there while I was there, I was known for fighting. I used to throw my hands up a lot. Um, Temper, anger, issues,
Me too.
over boys. A lot of it was, over the stupid boy drama. Just a lot of memories. I mean, a lot of friendships. One of uh the things I remember most is we did a talent show, and it was when We Are the World was the song, that was the collaboration, and we did that. And I hit some people up recently because I saw the video on somewhere on YouTube or something, and it just showed how, like Jeff said, you take a bunch of youth from all over New York. I mean, it was all over the state of New York, and you put them in a campus in upstate New York, and you watched different personalities and different races, religions, everything just come together because we were all there for pretty much the same reason. We were messing up at home. We had family issues. We didn't want to go to school. We didn't want to listen to our parents or authority, so we kind of could relate to each other. I
didn't want to go to school until I got paid for it.
Exactly, right? I mean, tubing down the hill at Ewald onto the frozen lake. I mean, that's one of the best memories I have, even though I hated snow.
We used to go ski jacking behind Lodge. They called it a ski jack. It was a little stool screwed to 2 skis. And you sat on that and you went down the hill. And if you can make it all the way down the bottom without falling over, you were doing good.
Yeah, see? But, I mean, there's so many memories that, I got to go on trips. We went camping at Tisdale's. I went to Niagara Falls.
I forgot about Tisdale's.
Tisdale's, yeah. I have a picture, actually. I didn't send it to you, Jeff, but I have a picture of me at Tisdale's in the pajamas that I ran away in. I have to send you that picture. So there's a whole story about me running away in July of 86.
Tell the story. Come on.
Oh, gosh. So I'm in the back of Stralem because I moved around. I could tell you I went McAllister, Stralem, Strain, Millette, McAllister, Stralem. Those were the houses.
Explain what those were. Those were the homes that we were living in with house parents.
Those were the names of the cottages that we lived in. There was girls' houses and guys' houses.
Right.
So anyway, I'm outside in the back of Stralem, and one of the girls' boyfriends had got this guy in Long Island to drive him back up to George Jr. to pick her up. So they're like, Karen, you got to come with us. Come on, you got to come with us. And I'm like, I don't even have shoes on. I have like my pajama outfit on that I was wearing to bed. Needless to say, I ran away to Long Island. It was like 5 of us in a Cadillac. We drove 4 hours or 5 hours down to Garden City, Long Island. Yeah. I'm literally walking on Sunrise Highway with no shoes on in July. I wound up making it back to Nyack. Got a ride up to Nyack. Guy I was staying with at the time on that home visit was a crack dealer. But I had to go home because I wanted to see him, and I need, that's a whole nother story. But, it's the mentality that, like Tom said, you're trying to fit in. You just want to be, around people you think you're supposed to be around, or you're supposed to feel like this is family, or, you want to be wanted, so to speak. So, but anyway, I wound up going to court, and they were like, you got to, go back up. So I went back up and stayed until 87. But yeah, there's just so many things and so many memories and so many people and staff members. Miss Harris, she passed away. I think it wasn't too long ago.
Yeah, not very long ago at all. She had Alzheimer's. I kept up with her.
Yeah.
She and I used to talk, email for up until about 5 years ago for probably 10 years. I love Mrs. Harris.
I called her after I had run away because I had made a sculpture in the art class and it wasn't finished. It was at the firing stage. I called to find out if it made it through the firing stage because the concern was that it was so thick that it would explode. Because if there's air bubbles, it would explode, and then all the shards gets on all the other stuff in the kiln. But she said, "You're not supposed to call me." And I said, "I just want to know about that." I found out that it wound up in the display case in the courtroom next door to the art shop.
Yeah,
that's where it wound up.
I got a story to tell about Nancy Harris. She found a picture book, and she said we were doing canvas painting with acrylics. I'd never seen any of that stuff before. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I pulled that picture out and I said, well, I want to paint this. I couldn't do the sunrise, so I did a sunset. And that picture hung on the wall in Ewald because it was really nice for a while. And then they had an art show down at one of the banks, and somebody bought that picture. I remember Nancy Harris telling me somebody bought it for $300. Now, here's the thing about that picture in the book. When I went to Oregon at 17, I ended up going fishing. And I was standing on the shore of this mountain lake, and I looked because you had the picture of Mount Hood in the background, but you were up high enough in the lake to just see the cone. And I was like, damn, if that ain't the picture I painted in that book. And now I'm standing on that lake looking at the very picture that I painted from that picture book. It was really cool. Really cool.
Yeah.
I want to tell the quick story about when I ran away, because I ran away. I ran away, and me and the guy named Harold, and we went to a farm, and there was a 1967 Impala with keys in it. Well, you can't leave the keys anywhere with Jeff. We took that
Especially
car.
when you need a ride.
I stole that car, and I'm not proud of this stuff. I'm just telling stories. Mm-hmm. We stole that car. I drove back to Rochester with Harold, picked up a friend of mine. His name was Ed Lino. Then we drove to New Jersey. I got money from my cousins because we didn't have no gas. And as soon as I got the money from my cousin, the car was filthy dirty, okay? I was probably about, 15 at the time. A cop pulled up behind us, and we went to a juvenile detention. Ed was older. He went to jail. But in that JDH that they put me in down in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, that was the most brutal place. I watched kids get beat half to death by the staff, and I was like, wow. And it was a big eye-opener to me because that was nothing like George Junior Republic. Right. I mean, I watched this one security guard take another kid and just smash his face against the wall. And I was like, whoa. And then they put me on a plane. The first time I was on a propeller plane, took me back to George Junior Republic. Tom, I'm going to jump up to you now. Let's talk about when we left. Okay. What happened, Tom, after you left George Junior Republic, and how's your life today?
Well, Karen mentioned, you learned.
Hang on a second. Do you guys mind if I go a little bit long on the show? Because we're going to do
an hour.
But
it's all good.
I'd like to keep going. Okay. Let's talk about, we're going to start with you, Tom. You left, you went home, or wherever you did. Tell us about your life.
Well, like Karen said, you learn responsibility and accountability. But unfortunately, I went right back to where I left. So my first day home, I was out partying because I'm back with all my brothers and my friends, and I'm back where I started. And so it took another, as I left in 78, I moved to California in 88, and I still didn't get it together. When I left there, I was, partying and getting in trouble and, not holding down jobs. You worked a day to get some money, and it didn't matter if you had to work tomorrow because you got the money today. But the one job I had, we were building swimming pools, and that was a great job because we got half the money up front. And so then the one guy, he'd take off to the man's house and come back. And then I wound up doing the same stuff that I left when I left. Doing the same stuff was what caused me to go there in the first place for the most part. I was welcome back home, but eventually I came home one day from work, and my mother said my little sister and her were moving to a smaller place. I could stay there where we were at, or I could find another place. In other words, I'm on my own as of right now. So it took a while. I got tired of, I had nothing. I got to a point where I had nothing. I had no place to live. I had no job. I had no prospects. I lived in the bar. I lived down at the guy's house in New York City where you get the substances. And so I really didn't, I learned a lot, but it didn't carry over, let's say, until later in life, 10 years later, at least. So when I left Rockland County, I came to California, and it took a couple of years to get all the cobwebs out. But eventually I'm retired now. I owned 2 pizza shops for almost 20 years, married for just about 29 years. I got 2 great kids. I don't smoke. I don't drink. Life is good. And I don't mind telling my story to people. Yeah. But things are different today than they were then.
Yep.
Right. That's true.
Back then, I mean, I don't know about you, Karen, but when I was there, I've heard stories of later years at the Republic where there was sexual abuse by staff members and students.
Right.
And I heard that, you know, like Newberger I've heard was been broken up into 4 separate little living quarters where if you were good and there wasn't that many kids there, you got a double. That was one of the rooms that had 2 beds. Yeah. And if you got that by yourself, that was good. And I was almost up to be a young adult. You had to be recommended to be a young adult. But then I got caught smoking weed that we grew in the house. Because plants and books was a big deal when I was there.
Yeah.
And so there were plants all around the living room, and we had the big 5-gallon bottles, and we'd make terrariums with them. Well, once you put something in there to grow and it gets all foggy, you can't see what's in there. This plant was growing 6 feet from where Pop Ashley would sit at the table. But once it started to pop out the top, we had to pull it. So we pulled it out and let it dry and stuffed, took all the tobacco out of a cigarette and stuffed all the weed. And then me and another guy named Gary Murillo sitting up by the big water tank behind Newberger. And here comes Pop Ashley bounding up the hill. We're smoking weed. So we got the jail crew, and they were having a softball game out at Lodge Field that day. So we got marched over there, and we were in jail, but we're all high, so it didn't matter. But anyway, life is good now. You know, the pizza business was very good to me. I own my house. I own all 4 cars in my family. I don't know anybody on the planet a nickel.
That's awesome.
So it was a rough road to get here. And I don't mind telling the stories, even if it's not Georgia Union Republic. If it's, my kids don't know about my history. I only tell them that if you need to know something about a particular subject, you ask me. I can tell you. I won't tell you how I know, but I can help you with that. So it wasn't such a bad thing. Looking back on it, it wasn't terrible. But like I said, I was a small kid, so I didn't get into many fights because there wasn't very many people I could beat up. I made friends with the big kids. There was one guy there, Gus Webb. He was the guy I made friends with him, and there was another guy named, I think his name was Warren Montgomery. I think he was in Choate. He was like a karate dude or something. He said, "I'll sting you. I'll sting you." Yeah, right. Shut up. But I smile about it now. You know, at the time, like I said, the haircut, that was my first outburst. I had another outburst with the house parent himself, where we went to blows, and I took off out of there. And there was another guy there that he walked with me around the entire property to calm down. And, it was understood that I got in trouble. I got to face the consequences, but it wasn't severe because I realized things that, you jump to anger because that's all you know, out of frustration. So, and I didn't get put on rotation. I got out of that somehow, but so Newberger was my place from when I got there, and the window I climbed out of when I left.
Tom, what would you, before we jump to Karen, what would you say to a young person that might be struggling in kind of the way your life was like? What would you say to that person? Now, I mean, it's been 50 years, so
times have changed, but there are people you can talk to. There are people that understand you're not alone. You don't have unique problems or situations or circumstances. There are people that are there that will listen. You just have to be, it's hard to admit when you're wrong. It's hard to admit you have problems. It's embarrassing to admit your family is not like your friend's family, where they all sit around a table as a family and have dinner and things like that. Those are things that are hard to admit, but just take a chance. That's all I would say. Just take a chance. And, the old rule from, back in the day, just say no, because that was another thing. I got caught up with the wrong crowd trying to fit in. And so that meant doing drugs and drinking and stealing. And, I was a tough guy when I had 4 of my big friends with me. But just ask somebody, when they say, this person will talk to you. If you want to talk to them, talk to them. Don't be afraid. Don't be embarrassed. Once you break the ice, it's good. Life is good. I can tell you from where I'm sitting right now, from where I once was, life is good. And I just told you how good my life has been. So it's an experience that I enjoy sharing with somebody. I enjoy laughing about it with two people that understand what it was like. You know, like I said, mention the brick story when she said you had to scrape the wax off. And if you were disruptive in the jail crew, Pop Towner would give you a bucket and a brush, and there was that back room behind the coat room in the Boskowitz, or no, in the Ewald.
Yeah.
He'd give you a brush and a bucket of water and say, you start scrubbing those bricks. And he'd tell you, you scrub about 10 or 15 bricks and you change the water. You go back, you scrub some more, you go back and change the water. Or you could just fall into line and start behaving yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
So it was easy to behave yourself. You know, it was okay, you know. You just learn. You learn what happens if you break the rules, you get in trouble. So it's easier to go along with the program. But when they said I would have to stay there longer than, you know, I remember distinctly his exact words, for a period not to exceed 18 months, 17 months and 3 weeks, I should be leaving next week. And he said, no, maybe 3, maybe even 6 more months. And that's, like I said, I stood up and stuck out my hand and I said, nice knowing you. I won't be here in the morning. And me and another guy split. And I already told you that story. And that was it for me.
Karen, before you tell your story, because I kind of want you to go through all of the things that you have accomplished, but I want to just kind of jump in here and say that, you know, what George Jr., because when I went back to Rochester, New York, about 4, maybe 3 months later, I was on a Greyhound bus to the Pacific Northwest by myself. And I've been here pretty much most of the time that I have been gone from Rochester. And the thing that George Jr. Republic gave me when I was there is an appreciation for people. I've never lost that. I think people are amazing. I love people. It's one of the reasons I do this kind of stuff. I love people. I also became biblically involved. I learned the history and all this kind of stuff. And I went through some stupid stuff too. I did drugs afterwards. I made my mistakes. But I also ended up owning a couple of businesses, a plumbing business. I owned a restaurant. And today, my wife and I have 34 years. We've had 4 kids. She has 3 of them. Life is good. And it's just been an amazing thing because all of us could have been dead before we even got to 18.
That's right.
And so I kind of want to say that. And if I was to say to a young person, you know, the situation you're in right now isn't going to be the situation 5, 10 years from now. The difference is the choices you make. Right. We had supervision when we needed it, and it made a difference. George Jr. Republic has been, it was my salvation, if you will, as a child. And so I have very fond memories. Of course, when I was there, I was ready to leave every day.
Of course.
However, what I was taught while I was there has been with me ever since. And I just appreciate being able to share this. I appreciate the Facebook group. I appreciate meeting you guys. We were all there at different times, which gives 3 different perspectives. But Karen, you're going to kind of wrap it up for us because your life, and take as long as you need, okay?
Oh, wow. What time is it?
Within 15 minutes, we gotta respect Carol's time too. But your life, let's go when you left.
All right. So I left in June of '87, and I started college immediately when I left George Jr. I started St. Thomas Aquinas, and I was in the summer program and living in the dorm. I actually was at the Spring Valley Flea Market, June 19th, 1987. And anyone who knows me knows I know dates, like it's just sickness I have with knowing dates. But I happened to bump into an old acquaintance who I wound up getting into a relationship with that lasted 15 years. So I immediately pretty much got pregnant, and I dropped out of college, and I had my daughter in June of 88. So, I mean, there's so much that happened in my life during that time, but I wound up living with that same friend and her mother until April of 88, and I wound up out on my own in an apartment in Nyack with my sister. It was her and I in an apartment. So I basically have been on my own since I was 17 years old, paying bills and, just surviving, so to speak, still. I worked. I've always worked. I wound up going to college. I worked at a restaurant in New York, in Nyack, and I owe a tremendous amount to the two women that owned the Coven Cafe in Nyack, Honey and Vivian, because they gave me a job, and I started to go to RCC, Rockland Community College, when my daughter was very small. And I wound up with nowhere to live, and they were able to find me. This is at one point I left my daughter's father, and I they knew the owner of a condominium complex in Muncie, New York, and I wound up going to live there with my daughter, and I stayed in that complex for 13 years. But during that time, I was back and forth with who became my husband, and the father of my three children. That relationship was an extremely abusive relationship on every level. And I always told myself, and I don't want to get emotional, but I always told myself when I saw my mother getting beat up by my father, that I would never allow that in my life. And, you know, although I learned so much about what I deserve and what I didn't deserve, I allowed myself to stay in a relationship from June 19th, 1987 to December 2nd, 2001. And we actually married on June 19th, 1996, a year after our second child was born. And then we had another child in July of 97. So I have three. But, I got to the point in 2000, end of 2001. So it was December 2001, rather, that I became very close with God and decided that I was going to end my marriage with my ex-husband, and I needed to move forward with my life, and I didn't want to be treated like I was being treated anymore. But during that time, I had graduated from Rockland Community College with an associate's degree, and then I also went on to St. Thomas Aquinas again, and I got a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Because it's funny, because in summer of 87, I'm in the HEOP, Higher Education Opportunity Program. When I first left George Jr., one of the questions I was asked in one of the classes was, put one word about yourself that you would define yourself. And I said, ambitious. So I've always been an ambitious person. I've always pushed myself. I call myself a survivor, all the things that I've seen and done and been through. And I was able to, just survive. I have always worked. I mean, I've had many different jobs over the years. I've always worked, but I did get a job at Verizon in 2000, August 2000, and I stayed with the company for 19 years.
That
In
was
2000,
Verizon, right? You said
that's correct.
Verizon.
Verizon,
Okay. Kind of
Verizon, yeah,
touched down a little bit there. Okay.
yeah, Verizon. And I moved to North Carolina in August of 04 with the company. I was in management for 15 of the 19 years I was with the company, and I took an early package. They offered early retirement package, per se, it was 5 years ago. So in 2019, I've had a lot of ups and downs. I'm not going to say that my life is perfect. I do have 5 grandchildren. My oldest daughter has 19-year-old, a 15-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 10-year-old, and one who just turned 7 yesterday. So I try to be, a great grandma to them. My son is here. He has a business in Wilmington. My younger daughter and I live together. She works and goes to college also. But I'm not going to say that I haven't still had struggles. I still have struggles with it being emotional. I take friendships and relationships very seriously. I think I still, longed for things that I didn't get from my upbringing and my childhood. But I don't dwell anymore. Like I really don't dwell on the negative parts of my past. I try to use the things that I have gone through to put more positivity and joy out in the world. I've done things such as mentoring young girls. I've spoken at different programs for youth and things like that. Something that's always been a passion of mine. And I think Jeff and I, when we talked about this the other day, because of the experiences and the things that we've been through in our lives, I know myself, I have a passion to help young girls and to help, these girls to see that, being promiscuous and doing all these things when they're really young, they're going to look back. Because I remember sitting in Strain House, which was at off-campus house on Main Street in Freeville, and Mrs. Valenti said, "You're going to look back at these things," because I was in love with one of the people there, and, I was head over heels, and she just was having a talk with me, and she said, "You're going to look back years to come and laugh at this situation, because it's going to be such a small period of your life. But when you're there, you think it's the biggest, life is never going to, this is it, but I think of that often. And I think of a lot of the lessons that I learned at George Jr. I learned a lot about, etiquette and just people, like Jeff said, just learning about people from all different walks of life. And I can walk up to a complete stranger and have a full conversation and be comfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've always been super sociable. People laugh at me all the time about it. My Facebook page, it just looks like I have this, huge, exorbitant, extravagant life. And I'm just blessed to be here. There are times that I did not think I was going to make it in my domestic violence situation, because it was that bad at certain times. There was a time while I was at George Jr. on a home visit that I basically came about that close to being murdered. And the person told me if I was in Brooklyn, I would have been dead already. So it's by his grace. And I'm going to say that because I am a believer, and it's by his grace that I am here. God has me here. My purpose is not served. I know that for a fact. I try to touch people's lives every day. I'm not perfect, but I just try to put joy and happiness out into people's lives and try to make them laugh. And, anyone who comes in contact with me, I want them to leave the interaction with me feeling better than when they came to me, if that makes sense.
It does. And we're going to kind of wrap this up here. But you went on to get a bachelor's degree.
And a master's. Oh, I forgot. I have a master's degree. I got a master's degree, an MBA in 2008. Verizon paid for. Thank you. So I have an MBA also. So someone who never went to school, was truant all the time, literally out smoking in front of the school every day, just a mess, wound up getting that much education. So it can happen. This my message to people: if I could do it, coming from the train wreck of a life that I had, anybody can do it. Yep.
Well, listen, you guys, Tom, I'll give you the last word, and then I want to thank you both personally for coming on and doing this, sharing your stories, the fact that we're all here. We survived our childhood like so many people. Life wasn't perfect, but we learned something. We got a chance to learn something, to see something that we could draw on. And I would credit George Jr. with that. A lot of those people that went to George Jr. didn't have successful times. I've talked to a couple of them. But at the same time, I just want to say thank you, Carol, for indulging us, for going a little long on this. For anybody who sees this show, we didn't go to a high school. We went to a school in the mountains that taught us how to survive in a different way than being in the streets. So, Tom, I'm going to let you kind of close us out. And again, thank you both for doing this, okay? What do you have to
Well,
offer, Tom?
I'm thankful to having been able to speak to you two about it and laugh about some of the times there. I mentioned the snow. That's one of the reasons I left Rockland County. I've seen snow 4 times in 34 years, because here in California, you can drive to the snow and leave when you've had enough of it. But I'm not sure how to sum up this whole thing, other than I'm reliving. I didn't have very many negative things there, other than just cut my hair off, and I wasn't bullied. Like I said, I was a small kid, but I did grow up while I was there. I'm friends with people on Facebook from there, but like I said earlier, some people are just not into corresponding, and I respect that. That's fine. They took the time to say hello, and that was that. I met some good people there. The snow. I mentioned the snow. The snow would drift up against the back of Newburgh to the point where we tunneled in, and we had a hiding spot back there inside that snowdrift where we'd go hide and smoke cigarettes. You could stand up in this snowdrift little cave that we made, but it wasn't a terrible experience. At the time, it obviously I don't want to be here, but looking back, it wasn't terrible. It served a lot of purposes. I probably still don't realize how many of them, but I think I've incorporated a lot of what I learned there into my life today without realizing it.
Right. I agree.
So life is good. I know I'm friends with you, Jeff, on Facebook. I'm going to look for you, Karen, on Facebook.
Oh, I'm there.
And I like talking about it. I'm not ashamed of it. Yeah. I might be somewhat hesitant to talk about what brought me there as far as my home life, because it's a painful time in life, but it just added to learning something, being a little 15-year-old kid. And like I said when we started, I was never part of the group per se, because we moved a lot. I went to 7 different schools before I got to high school. So I was always the new kid, and I was always tested, and I was always had to try to make myself popular, and did it the wrong way. The kid that would go steal stuff, and the kid that drank too much, and the kid that did the more substances than everybody else. So you think you were looked on as being cool. You weren't. You were look at that idiot over there. So anyway, yeah, it's been nice. It's been nice chatting with both of you, and it's been nice to go down memory. I also enjoy a stroll down memory lane once in a while.
Well, I would ask you both to do yourselves a favor, and me as well. Share the links that are going to be posted on YouTube, on Rumble, and also on Facebook. And stay in touch. And I just really appreciate, again, you taking the time to do this so we could talk about it. My wife bought me this thing today. It wasn't supposed to be here for a couple of weeks, and it showed up today before the show. So I was really happy about that.
That's anyway. Fate.
Yes. Yep. And that's also my God that I serve.
That's right.
Who takes care of us. Listen, thanks again. I appreciate this very, very much. We'll stay in touch on Facebook. Thank you. Have a blessed evening, and we'll be seeing you guys later, okay?
All righty. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. I see your message. All right. Bye-bye, you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Carol, are you going to end the stream?